Welcome to Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here is the podcast host, James Delingpole.
Welcome to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very unusual guest, I'd say. His name is Mike Daunt. He doesn't know much about recording technology or about the internet. He doesn't know that you're not allowed to swear. So if he swears, you'll have to forgive him. He's just untutored. Mike, you are, I would say, probably the greatest fishing teacher in the world. Is that a fair description of you?
Well, it's a lovely description. I'm not sure it's true.
You've taught some serious people how to fish.
I have. I'm very lucky.
Eric Clapton.
A difficult little shit, but there we go.
Right. Chris Tarrant.
I'm very fond of, yeah.
Who else? Who?
Jeremy Paxman. Guy Ritchie.
Mr. Madonna or Mr. X.
I don't think he'd love you for saying that.
Mr. X Madonna.
Mr. X Madonna, yes.
And the Duchess of...
Devonshire, yes.
Duchess of Devonshire. So you've been at it for quite some time. We have a special friend who listens to our podcast, and I imagine our special friend is quite interested in fishing. We've just come off the river, haven't we?
Yes.
And just tell me about the kind of day we've had so far.
Well, I mean, you can't really ask much worse conditions than we've had today. The river's very high because we've had so much rain. It's coloured so that the fish can't see the flies.
Yeah.
But I'm afraid that's fishing, and it's fun. It doesn't matter. You've got to accept that whatever you get.
Well, yeah, you say it's fun, but I remember the last time I went fishing with you in the mayfly season last year, and the mayflies weren't doing whatever mayflies are supposed to do. We caught absolutely sod all fish.
We did not. We caught several. You caught your first.
So no. I think that may have been several years ago. What I'm gently suggesting is that it seems to me the default position of fishing is not catching any bloody fish because
that's not true.
Because the conditions are always wrong for some reason.
I think to a certain extent that is true. And there's a lovely Scottish rhyme about that, which is sometimes o'er early and sometimes o'er late. Sometimes they water and sometimes a spate. And I can't remember the rest of it, but that's always an excuse.
But it's Scottish for you never catch fish because the conditions are always...
If you've got half a chance.
Always wrong.
Exactly.
So... You have a very interesting technique in teaching people how to fish. It's because it's all to do with timing, isn't it?
The casting is all timing, very much so. It doesn't matter if it's a spey cast or if it's an overhead trout cast. And the old timing for all the rods was that when you take the rod back, you say, "God save the Queen." But I think that's a load of crap because people are never going to remember.
Well, how does that work then?
You cast back, you said, "God save the Queen," and then you went forward.
Right.
But people are never going to remember that.
So what do you use?
I've decided to change it somewhat. Yeah. So as you do it, you don't say, "God save the Queen," you say, "Caw fuck me now." And people do not forget that.
Right, okay. And did you try that on the...
I tried it on the Duchess and she loved it.
Did she? And what about the casting? Yeah. So, my grandfather, when he had money, I think he got into fly fishing, and he bought all this very expensive equipment, and I think he spent most of his sort of retirement years being frustrated at his inability to catch fish. I mean, it is quite hard, isn't it?
What, to catch anything?
Yeah.
Well, that's not quite true. I mean, you've got one of my sons fishing with us today,
yeah,
who has caught the biggest salmon that I've ever seen, let alone caught.
Yeah, he does have the advantage of having a father who is a leading fly fishing instructor. Have you noticed?
Absolutely, but he did catch the biggest salmon I've ever seen.
Which is how big?
42 pounds. It's an enormous salmon. I've fished all my life and I've never caught one bigger than 29 and a half. I've caught 3 of them.
42 pounds, that sounds pretty small to me. Are you sure
it's vast. I mean, most people in a lifetime are lucky if they catch one.
Where was that fish?
In Russia.
Is because I've heard that Russia and Siberia are
the rivers of Russia. There are several salmon rivers of Russia which we all knew existed, but they were never fished at all by professionally until very recently. Well, recently within the last 20 years, because of the Cold War and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But then there was a man called Peter Power, who I was lucky enough to be at school with, who bought a tiny small holding in Russia of 3 million acres, which is just with 4 of the greatest salmon rivers in the world, and turned them around from being the mess that they were in because they were overfished and nobody cared for them, nobody looked after them. And he made them into one of the greatest, well, they still are, the greatest rivers in the world.
So when was this? In the 90s, in the noughties?
In the 90s, yes, in the 90s. And those rivers are really the Karlovka, the Eastern Lits, and the Rinda. Those are some of the greatest rivers there are.
So if I wanted to go fishing for £42, what was that?
£42
salmon?
Yes.
Yeah. What would I be paying for that experience now?
The peak week nowadays is about 10 to 12,000 quid. A lot of money.
And what you get there by helicopter?
You fly to Murmansk by various ways. Basically, you fly to Sweden to start off with and go from Sweden through to Murmansk afterwards, and then you get a helicopter from Murmansk, which is an hour's flight into the middle of absolutely nothing, above the Arctic Circle.
But aren't most of these beats now owned by oligarchs?
Yes, they are now. I mean, Peter sold his small holding of 3 million acres, to an oligarch.
Because that's what I was wondering. Was when your boy Will caught his £42 salmon, I imagine you got that tiny window between the old Soviet era and the oligarch era.
Absolutely.
And it's all gone now, basically.
Totally.
So,
because, I mean, and the reason for that is very simple, is there used not to be a middle class in Russia.
Right.
There was the very rich and the very poor. There is beginning, and I emphasize that word, to be a middle class now, who do have money, not just oligarchs, who do want to go salmon fishing.
Right.
The fact that they're appallingly bad at it, usually cheat.
how do they? What, they use dynamite or something?
Anything they can think of to catch a salmon. It doesn't
Right.
matter terribly.
Yeah.
Mind you, it's their rivers. They do what they've done all night. Nothing to do with me.
Well, I suppose so. But tell me, if one hasn't got 10,000 to spare, what's the kind? Where would you? I mean, isn't fly fishing generally such an expensive hobby now that you've got to be?
Well, it depends. I mean, fishing the chalk streams of England is expensive. Let's be truthful about it. You're talking about 150 out of season, 150 out of season to 250 when it's at the peak time.
What per rod?
Per day, per rod.
Yeah, that's even more expensive than hunting, and I thought hunting was expensive.
On the other hand, if you want to go fishing in the reservoirs of England for rainbow trout, which I made the terrible mistake of writing, calling them the people's trout, which went down very well, made a lot of people laugh as well. But that you can do for 20 quid a day.
So there is a hierarchy of trout as well. So
absolutely.
rainbow are common, and
I'm afraid very common.
and brown trout are. Are there any other types?
What I'm being very let's not be snotty about it and very silly. The brown trout is indigenous to this country and has been here forever.
Right.
Particularly in the chalk streams of the south down here, and we, the British, own 90% of the chalk streams in the world. There are some in Brittany and France, but basically they're all British.
Yeah.
The pressure to fish those is enormous, as you can imagine,
Yeah.
because they're so few and far between. There is no chance that the wild trout of those streams could possibly cope with the amount of people that fish.
No.
So they're very heavily stocked. Now, to rear a brown trout, it takes a long time and is very expensive. The brown trout, to get to 2 pounds, would take 2 years. A rainbow trout would take 6 months.
Oh, I
It's
see.
slightly different.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
to get a fish, the rainbow trout only has a lifespan of 5 years. That's all they live for.
So what you're saying is that the rainbow trout is
And
like
they don't breed in this country.
they're like the grey squirrels of the trout world, and the brown trout are
because
the
they
red
don't
squirrels.
do any harm. No, that's not fair, because the rainbow trout doesn't do any harm
Right.
to the brown trout. It can live perfectly in harmony with the brown trout and doesn't hurt it at all.
Right.
And I'm a great fan. They fight like mad. They're great fun, but they do not live for a very long time.
Right.
And they are a quarter or a tenth of the price to produce the brown trout is.
So it's more sort of scarcity value than anything.
And expense.
And expense, right. And there's also sort of snobbery, isn't there, about how you catch the fish? I mean, if you dangle a bit of a worm, say, that is lower in the pecking order than, say, is dry fly at the top.
Yes, it is. There's a terrible snobbishness about it. It always pisses me off because I can't bear the snobbishness.
Right.
I only fish with the dry fly, some twat says, it really irritates me. He basically is incompetent at doing that anyway. And what I always love is when you get some trout get very big in the chalk streams, and they're given names by people like Fred and Joe, which always amuses.
Oh, what? Because they have to be put back.
Yeah, they've been caught and put back, and
Right.
then they won't take any fly that exists eventually because they know exactly what's a false fly and a genuine one. And so
they're quite. They do have a.
no, they are not fools.
Oh, I see.
And they sit there looking pompous all day long and kept taking the occasional wild fly and the wild nip, and people staring at them. They're called Fred and Joe. And eventually the village urchin comes along and drops a worm in front of their noses, and to my joy, gets caught.
So
I used to be that village urchin, I might say.
well, we'll come to that because I've read your autobiography, and I have to say you emerge as a very an appalling character, if people haven't guessed already. So, in the hierarchy, I mean, if I want to get on in the world and I want to be taken seriously as a fisherman, or no, am I an angler or a fisherman?
Well, again, there's a lot of pomposity about that. A fisherman is usually referred to as a fly fisherman or a salmon fisherman, and an angler is a coarse fisherman. That's a load of crap to me. The fish to me are beautiful, and I don't give a shit whether they're trout, salmon, pike, roach, bream. I will get just as much pleasure out of catching any of those fish, and I am an angler. I'm not a fisherman.
Right. And but I suppose it's to your advantage that if you want to make a living out of teaching people to fish, there's got to be this kind of snobbery value so that you can charge higher rates for.
Without question.
Yeah.
There's no doubt of that. I mean, to teach people to spay cast for salmon or to overhead cast for trout is far, far more expensive than to show someone how to catch a carp.
Right. And in terms of, if we're going to the absolute peak of snobbery here, which is smarter, catching a brown trout on a chalk stream in mayfly season, or catching a salmon in Scotland, which is
God, that is the two things are equal. They really are.
Right.
There's no question of that. I personally passionately love fishing for salmon because they're totally wild. They are not introduced by mankind into the rivers. Tragically, the salmon stocks are declining really badly, for a variety of reasons.
Right.
The trout stocks are always going to be there because they're farmed.
Because they're bred. And so have the Scottish rivers, the salmon rivers, and the Welsh rivers, have they reached the point where it's almost not worth the candle?
Very much so. Very much so.
That's sad, isn't it?
Tragically. I was brought up fishing the Scottish rivers.
Yeah.
And taken there and shown from an early age, how to catch a salmon up there. My first salmon came from Scotland. But now, I can give you an exact example. There used to be a time when I fished the Spey, when 5 of us fished Carron and Lagan, on the Spey, and we used to average at least 1 salmon per person per day. So at the end of the week, we'd always caught between 30 and 50 salmon, depending on how good it was. Now, people come back who I have taught to spay cast, and they say to me, "We caught a salmon."
After a week's fishing?
5 of them catching 1 salmon in a week's fishing.
Oh my goodness! That you
It
need
is
the
utter
patience of
tragedy.
Job to
It is
endure
a
that.
joke now. It is hugely expensive, and you will not catch a salmon. And if I get skinned by the Scottish landlords, that's not my problem, because they have not looked after their rivers anywhere near as well as they should have done. particularly certain rivers, and that's the Spey, where the landlords spend most of their time rogering each other or each other's wives.
Is that right?
And I don't give a damn if you don't like it. Do something about getting your salmon fishing right.
So if you wanted to catch salmon and you couldn't afford to fly in a helicopter to Russia, where would you go?
The best bet really is Ireland. You
really?
get such fun in Ireland too. Terrific laughs. And you get and there's.
So Ireland, that is that similar to the glory days of Scotland? You can still
You can still catch plenty of salmon in Ireland. I don't ask me why it's better, but it is.
And
I don't think that they've looked after their rivers any better than Scotland, because they probably haven't. But the fishing is much, much better in Ireland than it is in Scotland.
Right. And what about further afield? I mean, Iceland, is that?
Iceland is terrific, but again, you're talking huge money. Iceland's very, very expensive.
Okay. And America? I mean, the US, what's that like?
I've never personally fished in America, and it tends to be Pacific salmon, not Atlantic salmon.
Right.
And Alaska, for Pacific salmon, of course, is fantastic. But the Americans are very much better conservationists than we are. They look after their creatures and their fish very much better than we do.
Right.
I mean, the striped bass, which used to run around New York Harbour, was very nearly wiped out. And they bothered about it and cared about it. There is now huge numbers of striped bass, and they're terrific fun to fish for. That is classic America. They bother and care about the conservation. We could learn a great deal from them.
Right, and the Canadians the same, I imagine.
Absolutely, very much the same.
Yeah. So you haven't done much fishing over there?
No, I've done a little for Christ's sake, what's it called? Just off New York, Long Island.
Right.
I've done some up there at the Montauk Lighthouse around there.
And apart from salmon and trout, are there any other fish that you particularly recommend in your experience?
Well, yes, I love pike fishing. I mean, Chris Tarrant and myself did a film about fishing for pike on Chew Reservoir, when we caught some huge number. I can't remember how many it was, but a lot of pike, all on a fly. And neither Chris or I had ever fished for pike with a fly before, and somebody taught us how to do it and showed us how to do it whilst we were there, and we caught over 3 days a lot of pike. And fishing for pike in a chalk stream is tremendous fun. I mean, I took one of my sons fishing for pike recently this year, and we both had 2 fish of over 20 pounds each. That's enormous.
They're kind of evil bastards, pike, aren't they?
Well, they're freshwater sharks.
Right. Well, there you have it.
I think that describes them perfectly, actually.
Right. And do they ever attack humans?
No, they don't attack people.
Because can I tell you, I go swimming in a lake near us, and I know there are lots of pike in there. And every time I get to the deep water, I think, is it going to have a go at my toes?
Never. Not in a chance.
Right.
No, I've never ever heard of a pike attacking a human being. I mean, you get the Irish pike always do attack human beings, of course, much more than anywhere else in the world. And Jesus God, that pike was so big, he ate a whole man and a baby as well.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. I'm with you, because you've kind of taken the excitement away from my lake swim now. But at the same time, I didn't want to have my toes pecked off by when you get them off the hook.
Then you have to be very careful taking the hooks out of its mouth, and you have to hold the mouth open, because the teeth are very sharp indeed, and they have an anticoagulant in their mouths, in their teeth, which makes you bleed and bleed and bleed non-stop.
Yeah.
And that's intentionally good. I've actually got a little scar there, which you can see, huge scar on my right index finger, going all the way across, which was when I took the hooks out of a pike when I was a boy of about 9, and very foolishly did it without holding the mouth open properly.
Apart from, have you ever done the sort of actual sharks, deep sea fishing and stuff?
Yes, I have. Marlin fishing, yeah. I've done marlin fishing off the coast of Kenya in the Pemba Channel. Tremendous fun. And there was one occasion when I was persuaded to take out someone else. I always like fishing alone or with a friend, but I was persuaded by the chap who owned the boats to have someone else who just dropped in to come with me, who happened to be a German. I've got nothing against Germans particularly. This one was called
Heaven forfend.
This one was called Adolf, which was interesting. and he was up on deck, busily determined to catch a shark, which was a complete waste of bloody time when you're marlin fishing, which is very expensive. And myself and the skipper were down below, quite happily having a beer, and we suddenly heard an appalling shriek from up on deck, and we rushed up, and he'd been tied the line round his finger and had been pulling it back and forth, thinking it might attract something. And it did attract something. It attracted an 80-pound yellowfin tuna, which sliced through his finger just like cheese. And I found the finger on the floor and put it into a glass with ice, and we had to go straight back to the shore and get him to a hospital as quickly as possible.
Well, there's a mistake you don't make when deep
You
sea.
do not make that mistake again, but he paid for the day and we got the glass back.
And of your sort of celebrity tutees, who was the most promising fisherman, would you say? How is Eric Clapton's fishing?
Very average.
Right.
I wasn't. I didn't. I know there was a pain in the arse, actually. Quite honestly.
Oh, really? What,
There was very little humour. I didn't manage to get a smile out of him all day.
He's not. I don't think Eric Clapton's famous for his laughs.
I don't think that's absolutely true.
No, and Chris Tarrant.
One of the funniest people you'll ever meet, a terrific, warm, lovely, lovely human being, kind and fun and very bright.
And Deborah Devonshire.
Lovely, warm and kind again, lovely human being. But the other one I taught, which was bloody funny, was Max Hastings.
Oh yes, the distinguished
I
war
could
correspondent.
not get a smile out of Max, and he did every single thing wrong, everything. One of the things you have to do when you're doing a spay cast, in between the movements, you have to wait, and I scream, wait, and if you don't wait, you will completely destroy the cast. And Max would not wait. I couldn't, I don't know whether he did it intentional or I don't know, but I couldn't get him to wait. I couldn't get him to cast. And what worried me is because he's well known and he goes fishing everywhere, he'd then say, I was taught to do this by Mike Daunt, to make a complete balls of it. So eventually I'd had enough. And I said, Max, could you lay the rod down a moment, please? And he said, he's 6'6", and he looked down at me and said, yes, why? And I said, looking up at him, I said, have you had a lot of trouble with women all your life, Max? What the hell do you mean? I said, come a bit quick, do we? He never made the mistake of not waiting again. It was an extraordinary coincidence.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I think you'll agree. When you were teaching me today, I didn't come prematurely, did I? I think my timing was quite good.
Your timing was bloody good, actually. I have to admit.
That's good.
Well, and I hope your wife is happy about that.
I think we're going to end that particular segment. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, the world's greatest fishing teacher or whatever, Mike Daunt. More in a moment.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlowe.
Censorship is a key issue here, particularly for people on the right. Do you think it was addressed adequately?
Definitely not. It was useful to name check Diamond and Silk. It was useful to check even politicians who had campaign ads that were shut down. But in every case, Zuckerberg was allowed to essentially dismiss the case and move on.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern on SiriusXM Patriot 125.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special, very naughty, I would say. I think he's probably the naughtiest guest we've had, Mike Daunt. I won't tell you. I can't tell you the nickname I give him. It's two letters, FC, and the F stands for fat, but the C is it's unprintable. Mike, I've known you for a few years now, and the thing that's always attracted me to you, not sexually, I have to say, but as a character, is that you always seem to be very cheerful. And when I read your excellent autobiography, whose name I forgot, what's it called?
That's called The Bounder.
The Bounder, because you are a bounder.
And that was because myself and my cousin did a television program called The Bart and the Bounder. And the reason for that is he's a Bart, and I was the Bounder.
Yes. Well, then I read your book, and there's another person I know a bit like you. I had a very unhappy childhood, but it sort of overcame that to become this very happy person. But it wasn't fun. You didn't.
Well, it wasn't really, because my father, who was extremely famous actually, he was chief test pilot of Gloucester Aircraft. He flew the first jet, enormously and incredibly brave, and an appalling father. He was determined to be vengeful, to put it mild, upon my mother, who got bored stiff with him. I'm not really surprised, and had an affair. But that upset him so much that he was determined to get custody of me, which he did, which in those days Mum was described as a scarlet woman, which would never happen nowadays, thank God. And I was only allowed to see her once a month, provided I was accompanied by a nanny to make sure that she didn't do dreadful things to my psyche.
So you loved your mummy,
very much so.
and you were denied access to her.
Absolutely, very much so, until I was 15.
Yeah.
And then at one point when I was 15, I was at school at rugby, and I thought, bugger this, and I got on my bike and I bicycled at half term to Mum's in Warwickshire the whole way, and I appeared and I said, I'm here to stay. And I was welcomed with hugely open arms and never looked back.
So you were sent away to boarding school, and how did you get on there?
And my prep school was terrific fun. I was very lucky in that it was a very good prep school. It was called Hurst Court in Sussex, now no more, with the way of most prep schools have gone bust. And then I went.
But I was angling for, actually, Mike, you didn't get my cue. I want to know the story about the porn ring that you ran at school.
Don't. That wasn't at my prep school. That was at rugby.
Right. So tell us what happened.
Well, this was great fun. I was put into a place called the Towers, which was a little group of 6 of us, and we had our own cubicles, which 2 of us shared in each cubicle. And then there was a 4th cubicle, a big one, in which one of the masters usually slept. However, very foolishly, the school decided to put this very beautiful undermatron into the this cubicle, and we couldn't believe our luck. So myself and my great friend, who I shared the room with, drilled a hole through the wooden cubicle partition and waited until she came to bed at night. When we spied through this hole and we saw our first naked woman together, we were thrilled. And we decided that this was unquestionably a good money-making concern. So amongst the rest of the dorm, we charged 6pence, which was a huge amount of pocket money in those days, to come and have a little peer. And eventually, of course, it got round the whole house. And people were queuing and standing on top of each other, so we drilled more holes. And millions of people looking and standing on our beds and standing on top of each other, peering through. Why she never heard us, I cannot imagine. But each night she did a little strip until we got caught. And of course we did get caught, inevitably.
But you made quite a bit of money before that.
We made a lot of money.
Do you ever wonder? Do you ever wonder whether she knew about it and kind of got off on it?
I've often wondered that. I've often wondered whether she knew it and actually enjoyed stripping things.
How many boys were looking at one time?
8 at a time. At the 8 at a time. 8 holes at the peak.
I think
she must have known. And then there was a queue. They only got a short time, and she only she didn't stand naked for that long.
No.
So
the economics of the soft porn industry.
It bought me a new fishing rod, which I was extremely pleased about.
Yes, which of course leads us effortlessly to my favourite story, I think, possibly in your book.
This was a tragedy, because that beautiful, beautiful girl that we used to look in on, I used to go fishing at it was called the Black Pool. It was called the Dark Pool, sorry, just down the road. I used to bicycle there to go fishing for carp. And one day I was doing this, and I suddenly heard noises from the other side of the bank. I was in some reeds and fishing. And her name was Miss Broadbent. It doesn't matter, it's so long ago, she must be dead by now. And one of the most unpleasant masters that there ever was, and they were busy having a little romp. And I heard them doing this, and suddenly my carp reel screamed and made a filthy noise, and they both froze. And then Miss Broadbent tried to get off the top of whatever his name was, and I failed to remember. And he shrieked because he got his cock stuck.
It does happen, doesn't it? I mean,
it does happen.
Well, it did
and
happen.
they'd absolutely got glued together. So I couldn't bear this because poor Miss Broadbent, who I think I was secretly in love with, age 15.
Of course you were.
So I drove back and I stopped at a telephone box and I rang up the headmaster and I said, I want to speak to the headmaster, please. And eventually Walter Hamilton came on the line and he said, Headmaster here. And I said, one of your young ladies, one of your matrons has got herself stuck down by the dark pole, sir. Who's that speaking? Oh, never you mind, I said. Put the phone down. And the next moment, his car with a school doctor in came past, and then they came back. Miss Broadbent still stuck together with her feet up on the dashboard. And it was a magical sight. But several days later, I bumped into Walter Hamilton in the street, and he said, Daunt, you didn't by any chance go fishing last Sunday, did you? And I said, no, sir, I don't think so. And he said, I gather you've got ideas of becoming an actor. If I may say so, I think it's the wrong career for you.
So after rugby, you obviously were entirely unfitted to any career, clearly. What happened then?
Well, I wanted to be an actor, in fact, very much. And my father was determined that I wasn't going to be an actor. Actors? For Christ's sake, people like us aren't actors. Only homosexuals are actors. It's a classic bloody fool remark. So I thought, bugger you, and I went off and I got a scholarship to RADA behind his back. So hoping that he'd then allow me to do it if I did this. But the explosion was even louder than I'd ever thought. It was mainly because I think he knew that it was all tied up with my mother, who he hated with a blinding passion. And so he had to sign the agreement for me to get the scholarship, which of course I'd falsified. You know, I'd copied his signature.
Yeah.
And so I ended up being sent to Sandhurst, which is what he wanted me to do.
He wanted you to be a soldier, an officer,
I think
and a gentleman, even. Good luck with that.
Good luck, exactly. I couldn't have been more. I was a real square peg in a round hole to be put in the army. You know, I really wasn't. I loved it when I was in Borneo because of the wildness in the countryside, and I loved the tribes that I lived with there. But as a soldier, I wasn't very good.
What was your regiment?
Green Jackets.
And did you choose that, or?
Yes, I did. Because I'd been brought up in Oxfordshire for a lot of it with my father, a little village called Purton. And the local squire, the local colonel, was called Colonel Jack Duckett Hammersley, and he was incredibly kind to me, and he'd been a green jacket, ox and bucks.
I mean, in those days, pretty much I imagine all the officers had been privately educated.
Oh, very much, without exception.
Yeah.
I mean, completely without exception.
It's changed a lot now, hasn't it?
In the smarter regiments, of which the Green Jacket is one of them.
Right. I mean, now...
Green Jackets, cavalry guards, you know.
I don't want to be snobbish, but now you can't tell.
I honestly wouldn't know. I have very little to do with this anymore.
No, I can't imagine you're sort of obsessed with military matters. Knowing your idea.
Not my scene at all.
No. But so, were you in Borneo when was there a war on? There
was the Indonesian confrontation, the Brunei revolt.
So does that mean you've got a medal ribbon?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, that's quite.
I've got two, in fact.
And did you ever get shot at, or
once?
Did
Yes.
you? Or what happened?
I was in an ambush, which I hate talking about it, but I was in an ambush, and some people got killed.
Oh right, so you have actually seen the elephant, as they say.
Lovely expression, yes.
Yeah.
But what I really loved was living with the Ebans and the Dayaks, who were the local tribes.
Were they on your side?
Oh, very much so. And they were the old headhunters of Borneo, and the old head man of this particular longhouse I got to know very well had a whole lot of shrunken heads hanging from the ceiling,
Yeah.
which were the Japanese that he had taken with a blowpipe, mark you,
Right.
during the war.
So, and the bandits in this case were what? Were they communist
They were
insurgents?
the Indonesians and CTs, yes, communist terrorists.
Right. But it's funny, isn't it? I imagine now they would be Islamic fundamentalist terrorists rather than communists.
Absolutely, absolutely, without question.
Yeah.
I mean, different names, same mentality. You know.
So you were going on long range patrols into
on 4 or 5 days a week's patrols, yes, with usually 9-10 men.
and well, that's quite a response. I mean, you were what, second lieutenant at this stage?
I was a second lieutenant, aged 21, 22.
And you'd have been commanding a platoon.
Yes,
Just you were the most senior officer, and you'd have a platoon sergeant.
yes.
So you had quite a lot of autonomy,
Oh, very much so. Yes, I loved that.
and you knew what you were doing,
Yes,
despite your
Yes.
appearance of being.
yes, and I really enjoyed that. That was terrific fun. And very interesting, and you're meeting these extraordinary people. If you went back there now, is it sadly? No, I don't think it is. It's called Civilization and Progress. You would find them with television sets and, you could,
But when you went there, they were genuinely.
they'd never seen a white man before. They still talked about the Great White
Well,
Queen.
they'd seen yellow men before because they chopped their heads off.
Yes, but they'd never seen a European before.
Right.
And they still talked about the Great White Queen across the water, which was Victoria.
Oh, did they?
Incredible. This is in 1960.
So you obviously you had an interpreter to explain.
Absolutely.
Explain this.
Yes.
Well, wasn't there some story where didn't the headman's wife take a fancy to you or something like that?
Oh, don't know. It was a very funny story. He was a very naughty old bugger, the headman. One day after dinner, when I was in his hut, and he suddenly turned to me through the interpreter. They started giggling together, and the interpreter turned to me and he said, "Headman say you sleep with wife tonight." And I thought, Jesus Christ, this has never happened before. And he said, "She very beautiful." And so then suddenly this woman appeared who was like an elephant. I mean, she was gargantuan. And so I made up a wonderful load of crap about I had a wife already across the water, and my God would strike me down if I was unfaithful to her. And I was rather pleased with myself. I sat back on my haunches. Whereupon he said, "No good. You cannot sleep with wife. Your corporal sleep with daughter." At which point something which was the most beautiful creature I'd ever seen in years appeared, and I thought, that bastard's not getting his hands on that under any circumstances.
So you had to order him.
And so I said, he has the same problem. He is married in England. He cannot possibly be unfaithful. And somehow we got away with it.
Look, I don't want to force you to talk about your ambush, but I just want to ask you. Did you learn anything about yourself? I mean, about the sort of the...
Yes, I did. I did. It horrified me. It absolutely, and still does.
But do you think that having had an experience like that, does it make you a better person? Does it teach you anything about life or about...
Yes, I suppose it does. It makes you think that you realise that there should be peace in the world, and that killing your fellow human beings ain't going to make it any better. I really hate it, and I honestly don't want to talk about it.
So you left the army after, what,
7 years.
7 years.
2 years at Santos and 5 years commissioned.
Oh, right, okay, that's quite a long time. And then you obviously didn't get your dream of going to become an actor, because you're not an actor.
It sort of faded by then, actually, the other great thing about the army was when I guarded Hess, which was who was Hitler.
Oh, you haven't mentioned that one. Yeah, you guarded Hess, right? Okay, Rudolf
in
Hess.
Spandau prison. Yeah.
Yeah.
There were three.
Did you meet him?
Yes.
Did you talk to him?
Met him. What a silly thing to say. That's for me to say yes. I don't mean what you're saying. There were three of them in there. There was Hess, Rudolf Hess, von Schirach and Speer. The three of them when I was there. Von Schirach and Speer then were allowed free, but Hess was made to serve the life imprisonment, which meant life. And there was a tragic, pathetic sight of the Spandau prison was the most austere place you can imagine. and the exercise yard, and these von Schirach and Speer appeared on the dot of 11 for their hour's exercise and walked at great speed and chatting away to themselves round the exercise yards. And when they saw me, they nodded to me.
And you gave them the Hitler salute, presumably.
Of course I didn't.
No,
but shambling behind them, like a meth drinker from under the bridges of Waterloo, came this pathetic figure, which was Hess. And Hess was talking to himself, again, like the drunken meth drinkers of Waterloo. But he was never allowed out. In 1987 he died, having spent all his life virtually in captivity.
Was that the Russians who were in?
Yes, it was entirely the Russians.
They're sort of vindictive.
Because it gave them access to the West. That's why they wanted it. There was a mess, an officers' mess, which I went and had lunch at, but I knew that was why, and there was a great fat Russian officer sitting opposite me, and I said, "Why won't you let Hess free?" And got an interpreter, and he said he couldn't hear, so I said it again and got the interpreter to say it. And he exploded and walked out of the mess, to my huge pleasure, I have to say. But the most extraordinary thing about that whole prison wasn't Hess, and it wasn't von Schirach or Speer, that amidst this extraordinary austerity and horror of Spandau Prison, the night I was there, the only night, I visited my soldiers in the watchtowers at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I suddenly smelled this extraordinary smell coming to me, and I thought it can't be. But it was honeysuckle, and there was a tree which von Schirach had built in a little garden, and there was a nightingale singing in it, so that amidst all this horror was this man, that was nature at its most beautiful.
You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, the very naughty Mike Daunt.
By popular demand, Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson is now 2 hours.
2 hours, people!
Hear Sonny Johnson's cutting-edge conservative commentary every Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. East.
Every time I told you no, you turned around with a reason why there was something wrong with me. To all of you hypocrites and liars, I said, welcome to the universe of free thinkers.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson, Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, Mike Daunt. Mike, I'm fascinated by characters like you, because you're one of those people that hasn't taken the obvious path through life. You know, you haven't qualified as a lawyer and become a partner in a firm. You haven't become the head of a merchant bank or whatever, unlike many of your class or whatever. And you didn't go into acting, but you've had this sort of rackety life. But somehow you've managed to put your children through private schools somehow, and you seem to have carved out yourself this niche where you've survived and enjoyed life on your terms. And that's quite interesting, I think. I mean, how have you managed to earn a living from?
I've had the most wonderful life so far. It's been such fun, and I've met.
You say so far, Mike. I'm looking at you now, and I'm thinking. Sorry.
It's been terrific fun, and I've met so many fabulous, interesting, amusing people. I had my own fish and game company in London where I employed it ended up with 20 vans, and I employed only very good-looking and extremely stupid public school boys.
Why?
To drive my vans, because I wanted them to chat up all the little girls in the director's dining rooms with their Alice bands and their blue eyeshadow, and it was very successful because they sold huge amounts of stuff to them, the little girls, and so the whole thing was basically...
See, that's a product of its time, isn't it? I can't imagine there are many directors' dining rooms now.
I can't answer that question.
No. But so you had a good business there?
Very, and sold it eventually, only because I ended up running a business as opposed to being out and about, which I loved.
Yeah.
And I sold it, it went bust within a year because the guy to whom I sold it didn't realise the ethos behind it, fired all my public school boys and put his own people in. Little girls didn't want to be rogered by the boys out of the Billingsgate. It all went very wrong.
Yeah, you understood the market.
Very much so.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, it's jolly unfair on those of us who aren't as quick thinking and devious as you. I mean, have you ever actually done an honest day's work in your life?
I was interviewed by a guy called Adam Edwards for the Telegraph, and I gave him the quote, which I meant. I've never done a day's work in my life, which I haven't, because every single thing that I've done, and I would include the army in this, has been such tremendous fun.
So that is that your message to the youth of today? Ignore what your parents say and just go and bugger off and do what the hell you want.
I really do believe that you must do what you want. I've encouraged my children enormously to do exactly what they want. My eldest son is a musician. He's just literally last week with the what's her name? The Australian singer. She's a wonderful singer. I'm going mad.
What, Sia Furler? No. Sia?
No.
Kylie Minogue?
Kylie. And she's just released a record only last week. 2 of the songs on that were written by my son. So he's done exactly what he wanted very successfully. But he came to me when he was 15 and said, Dad, I want to be a musician. And I said, yes, you bloody well go for it. And encouraged him in every way. And I really believe you must do that with your children. Yes, I would say to parents, bloody well encourage them to do exactly what they want. If they want to be a road sweeper, let them be a bloody road sweeper, as long as they're a good road sweeper and makes them happy.
Yeah. So you then turned your fishing into your livelihood.
Yes.
You then started teaching
fishing, which really came about by mistake almost. One of the people who flew Spitfires with my father before the war was a man called Hugh Fulkes, who was the most famous salmon fisherman and sea trout fisherman, and wrote the most famous books and made the most famous films all about it of the 20th century. I emphasise 20th century because he died before our current century. And he rang me up when I was celebrating yet again selling the company, and not as I wasn't entirely sober, and said, I want you to come and work with me. We'll have a lot of fun together. And I said, but I'm planning on going around the world for about a year. And he said, very bad idea. You'll drink far too much and almost certainly get the clap. So I went and worked with him. And we had the most tremendous fun until he died. And he left me his name in his will. Since, although he was an atheist, he was determined to be immortal.
So he gave you his company name so that you could...
Yes.
You could,
so which is why my company is called the Hugh Fulkes School of Spaycasting, or Fulkes Fishing.
So, but do you find it difficult having to kind of make nicey nice with rich people? I mean, do you know that sort of master-servant relationship, or do you not let them get away with that?
No, I think they want much more from me really than I want from them. I mean, they're paying me for my expertise.
Yeah.
And if they don't do as I tell them, they won't get all the benefits from it.
Do you think the swearing is part of?
That's part of me. I can't really help it.
Part of
if they don't like it, they can fuck off. Quite frankly.
And so in between there was a very racy bit in your book about your affair with the
I loved her
actress.
so much. My beautiful, beautiful actress. I had a wonderful affair with this very famous, very lovely actress for 9 years. And she was terrific fun.
Did you look very different from how you look now, Mike?
Sorry?
Did you look very different then?
I was slim and beautiful.
Wait.
Not a fat old fart. No.
Right, okay.
Just to get, so before you can say it.
Right. So how does one go about pulling a famous actress? What did you do?
Well, I did actually. It's not true. I was in a pub called the Nelson in Montpelier Square, which is no more because it's the houses there are worth so much money. It's now a private house.
Yeah.
And I was there with a whole lot of mates and friends, and she came in, this vision with a chap that I knew from being in the pub, and he introduced me, and I bought them both drinks, and I thought, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And she sat there, and I chatted her up like mad. And eventually he got more and more pissed off, and I don't blame him, actually. And eventually he whisked her onto his motorbike, and they disappeared off into the sunset. But I had her phone number. And I rang her the next day, and that was the start of an affair of 9 years. It was tremendous fun.
So is your recommendation there persistence and deviousness?
No, it's not deviousness, no. But do wade in if you want something, wade in with 8 feet and get it. Yes.
Yeah. So were you like her kind of, what? I mean, she had a job, she was doing her acting career, and you were just kind of a bit of stuff.
No, because that's very unfair. Quite funny. No, I certainly wasn't. She was very in love with me as well. We were very in love with each other. It was a wonderful affair.
And but you must have met loads of celebs then.
I did
through her.
I met a lot, and yes, I did. Yes.
Who would you rate? Who did you get on with, and who were absolute stinkers?
It's a very simple question. I met Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor I thought was a pain in the bum, but Richard I loved. It was terrific fun, and I know enough poetry to get him to say, you know, I very deviously, and this was devious, I'd suddenly say, do you remember that one now? It starts off like this, and I'd sort of half quote it, and Rich once you've got him going, wouldn't stop, and his wonderful voice, one of the most beautiful voices you ever hear. I got used to get him going. We had the odd lunch together, and I liked him enormously.
Wasn't he a terrific drinker?
Yes, he was. So what? It was great fun.
No, what I mean is, could you keep up with him?
No, is the answer to that. I don't want to particularly.
Was he like? I mean, was the main pleasure in just hearing those Welsh?
We found each other very funny. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, he's a very funny man and very badly behaved, given him the opportunity. We told each other stories of appalling behaviour and thoroughly enjoyed it. If you ask me the one that I thought was a horror, and this was my actress's great friend. I couldn't stand the little shit, and that was Dirk Bogarde.
I only met him once, but mind you, I think he might have taken a shine to me. He was charming.
He had his boyfriend with whom, that's a really silly word to use, his lover, his husband, or whatever, your wife.
I think boyfriend is fine, yeah.
But was a chap called Anthony Forward, who was married to Glynis Johns, and Tote, as he was called by all his mates, was one of the most lovely, gentle, fun people you could ever meet. But Dirk I couldn't stick it, but he was only fond of Dirk Bogarde. And he had a great jealousy because he was very fond of my actress. If he'd been straight, there's no question they would have had a raging affair.
Yeah.
But he knew he couldn't, and he loathed any man who was close, and he loathed her husband before me. He was a lovely man. I'm very fond of him.
So Dirk was the worst, and
yeah, I stayed in with his. I was very lucky. I stayed in his stunningly lovely house in Provence. We were invited for a week, and Dirk he could not understand how someone would fly back after only 3 days because it was the height of the mayfly season. Dirk Bogarde was much more important than catching a trout, but he wasn't to me.
Right. And I just remembered, you told me the story about how you were in Hong Kong and how you made your bit on your living on the side while your
that
glamorous
was with my
girlfriend.
lovely actress as well. She was playing out in Hong Kong with Derek Nimmo, and I went out with her. But I didn't want to not work for a week. It was her suggestion that we took out some smoked salmon. So we talked to Derek Nimmo, and we managed to smuggle 500 sides of smoked salmon out with the wardrobe, which we then sold in Hong Kong because they couldn't get decent smoked salmon there. And we made a very good, huge profit out of it. It was great fun.
So, So you had this sort of experience of being close to this profession that you wanted to join once,
yes.
and no sadness that you.
Yes, I wish I had done it. Of course, I do. Yes.
I think you'd have been quite good. I mean, you are a raconteur.
Yes,
and
I have a passion for the English words. I love them, and I love poetry and words when they're put together beautifully. Give me huge joy.
Actually, you just remind me how I met you, or
Well, I can't remember.
I remember early on when I met you. You had this fantastic scheme, which came to nothing. But I was going to get in on it because I thought it was going to be really exciting. You discovered the lost treasure of, what was it? Buried in a cave in behind some mountains in France.
That wasn't me. That was my cousin. That was the bard.
Yes, but you were involved in that.
Not really. That was much more his.
That was going to help.
It's never
pay the school.
happened.
No.
It's never ever happened. It still hasn't, and I don't know that it ever will. The people of the village, the French village concerned, are very protective about that, and they won't let anyone get into that mountain. But there is something in there, and I don't think it's a treasure. It may be. But we don't know. There's certainly dead bodies in there. I mean, skeletons.
All right.
But God knows what.
Yeah. Well, we can't develop that story because it's not your. It's not
my story.
Your particular anecdote. Well, I'm thinking, isn't it about time that we caught some fish?
Yeah. Yes. All right. But let's go and catch trout.
But we're not going to, are we? Because it's pissing down outside.
Well, I don't know if it's pissing down or not, but I'm actually quite enjoying sitting and having a drink with you.
Oh well, that's very flattering. But I get to go fishing once a year.
James, let's go fishing.
Okay,
that's not a problem.
You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special fishing guest, Mike Daunt. Thank you. Bye.
Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour.
I said that it's the epitome of hypocrisy. Unless you fall in line with their liberal agenda, this uniparty globalist liberal agenda, they will never support you. They use the whole gender issue, of course, as some kind of tool to prop up their messaging.